Hello, everyone, and welcome to the EVN Disrupt podcast. My name is Najdet Zaturyan. I'm the editor of the creative text section here at EVN Report. My guest today is Tania Sahakian. Tania is the regional director of DISQO, one of the larger tech companies in Armenia. She also has extensive experience in the education sector in Armenia through her work at the Tumo Center. Tania, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start with a little bit of your background. Can you tell us how you got started in your career and how you ended up in Armenia?
Sure. So I actually grew up partly in Europe and partly in the US. I ended up in Armenia the first time at a younger age through a program called Birthright Armenia. And that is how I kept coming back to Armenia. And in 2011, I was visiting Armenia when I was offered the position at Tumo, and I stayed. But it had been a long-term goal of mine, to come over and work from Armenia.
Tania, let's start with speaking a little bit about the products that DISQO has and what problems you guys are trying to solve. Can you explain to us what it is that DISQO does?
Sure. So DISQO is building a platform that lets product managers, marketers, or any decision makers at an organization understand their customers' experience better. So this lets them make them better decisions around their products or around their advertising. For example, our ad measurement product, it can ask advertisers, or you can help advertisers on the ads that people saw and what they thought about it, or it can track online sales that may have resulted from the ad. And with these solutions, we've, our clients are the biggest market research firms and advertising companies globally, including the biggest media platforms. Some of our clients, for example, are ESPN, Hulu, Washington Post, to name a few. We have an audience of over 20 million people, and we're able to understand and connect to what they think through surveys that we give them and what they do online through our mobile and desktop applications. And the key piece to this is that people opt in to give us this information.
Can you walk us through an example or a case study so that we can better visualize exactly how your customers would use this to gather better insights about their clients?
Sure. So, for example, let's take a big media company who has a movie coming out, and they have different trailers that they would like to test out on their audience. So we could then help them out to better understand, the consumer, how after watching the trailer, how they would behave or what their opinion would be. Whether they would actually go to the movie, or after watching the trailer, would they search for, this movie or try to find out more about the actual product. And of course, all of this is opted in. So the actual people sharing this information, it's their choice to be doing this as well.
Mm-hmm. So they would do that through a survey, for instance, that they would take after the trailer?
Yeah, either surveys or through our desktop or mobile application. So we recently actually did a study that we've published that had quite interesting information. And this is, I think, what differentiates DISQO from other companies. And the fact was that it revealed that more than 50% of people displayed behaviors that were different than the actual what they said they were going to do. So, for example, we focused on the auto, buying industry, and what people said that they were going to buy ended up being completely different to what they actually ended up doing.
When was DISQO founded? DISQO itself, not the office in Armenia.
So officially, it was founded in 2015 in Glendale, California, by 3 Armenian American founders.
Okay. And then you guys opened up your office in Armenia in 2018, 2018. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about that story? How was the decision made to open an office in Armenia, and why in Armenia?
So by 2018, DISQO had secured its Series A funding of 13.5 million. And the mission was to fuel, to build out the product very quickly. And in order to do this, we needed great engineering talent. And we already had knowledge and a network that talent existed in Armenia. And that's when I was brought into the picture to basically come in and launch the branch in Armenia.
So you joined DISQO specifically for this project?
Yes.
What was some of the challenges with opening up an office in Armenia?
Basically, I was asked, it's actually a funny story. Our CEO asked me to join the company, and he said, can you go to Armenia and help us find this key person, which was our director of engineering. And we had a very specific criteria that we were looking for. And also, obviously, we needed office space. And he said, go for 2 weeks, a month maximum, do this and come back. And to which I replied 2 weeks. But, this is how he thinks the impossible is possible. Right. But thankfully, it was a hard ask. And the one thing I did when I first came to town was, just network. And the one great thing about the Armenian tech community is, and what sets it apart is how helpful it is. And it's like a family. So everyone was willing to chip in and make the DISQO story a success. So we were very lucky to hire very quickly in the first 2 months, 25 senior engineers. And I think one of the reasons as well was because we were coming in, it was a transition time when Armenian companies were looking not so much to outsource work, but to actually build products in Armenia. Right. And this was very enticing, I think, for senior engineers specifically, because it gave them that growth opportunity. It was an opportunity to do what they would be doing in Silicon Valley, for example, in Armenia itself, building products for global companies and, world-class products for top-tier clients.
Looking back on that experience, is there anything you think that could have made it easier? Is there anything that needs to be improved, both maybe from a legal perspective in Armenia or from just how the tech sector operates in Armenia that would make it easier for more companies like DISQO to open offices in Armenia?
Honestly, I can't think of anything because it was, this might sound cliche, but it was a pretty smooth process. Everyone was very supportive, from the community to the government. And we were a pretty big company coming in already, and we hired very quickly. So we weren't able to take much use of the, tax incentives, but maybe that can be looked at for the future to entice more companies to come in. Of course, the talent pool, anywhere, not just in Armenia, is an issue. And this is something we like to focus a lot in Armenia and say it's an Armenia problem, but it is not an Armenia problem. It is a global problem. And that is why companies are opening branches globally. And now in the post-COVID era, it makes it easier to do this.
Right. Yeah. So it's been 4 years now since DISQO opened their office in Armenia. How big is your team today?
In Armenia specifically?
In Armenia specifically, yeah.
We're growing so rapidly that it changes daily, but at last count, we were 130 plus in Armenia with 20 interns.
20 interns, yeah.
Yeah, we're between 30 to 40% of the global company.
Mm-hmm. I always hear from junior engineers in Armenia that access to internships or entry-level positions is so hard to come by at these sort of bigger companies in Armenia. So to hear that there are 20 internship spots at a company like DISQO is exciting. Can you talk about what the process is like for you guys to take on interns? Is it mostly recruiting at universities, or are there other avenues?
We made it a mission last year to what we call give back to the community. The first year or two, we were hiring senior talent, and basically we were getting all the talent, and we decided it's time for us to cultivate some talent and give back. So we decided to start with one training internship program. And by the end of the year, we had 8 of them. We had trained over 200 people, including veterans. And as I mentioned, we had taken on 25 interns, and we've already hired a few of them. The programs are different. We've done everything from product management to Java to QA, DevOps, and now we're looking into data and data engineering. And, each one has specific criteria. Some of them have prerequisites. Some of them don't. For example, for veterans, we've made it with no prerequisites because we want to be, that opportunity for them to get into the industry. So it depends.
Mm-hmm. So when you say veterans, you're speaking about veterans of the war in 2020. How many veterans have gone through your programs?
Yes, so we've had specifically, and this was in partnership with the UIT. Each program that we've done, we've partnered with different educational institutions or organizations on the ground. And the veterans one was through the UIT. And we've done a product management, Java, and currently we're finishing this week a QA training program.
These are all specifically for veterans?
Yes, these are specifically for veterans or family members of veterans.
How many of them have gone on to take on roles in either at DISQO or just in industry in general?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've had over 200 trainees, and obviously we don't have, we would like to take everyone, but we don't have.
Of course.
It is part of our giving back to the community. There are people who have ended up doing an internship at DISQO. We have hired people as well, and there are people who've gone on to other companies or back into the training programs to further their education.
Right. Taking a step back and just looking at your training programs in general, not just for veterans, whether it be for Java or QA or product management, how long do they typically run for?
The way we've done these programs is there's a training component to it. So prior to actually starting an internship, we take on a bigger batch of applicants into a training program. So for 4 to 6 months, for example, right now we're doing one with GITC in JavaScript, where it's a 6-month intensive training program. And after the program, towards the end, there is a selection process and an application process for them to basically interview to become interns. So out of, let's say, the 50 people who were in the training program, there are select spots open for them to then compete for those internships.
Yeah. When you say GITC, do you mean the center in Gyumri?
So the center in Gyumri recently, this past year, actually opened a center in Yerevan, but this specific training program that we're doing includes a lot of applicants from the remote regions. So it's not Yerevan specific.
Mm-hmm. And can they work remotely from the regions of Armenia, or
yes, in fact, we have an interesting story of we had an applicant from Artsakh who actually at the time when he applied was still in the hospital. So he actually did the training program, through his rehab, from Artsakh remotely.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. What do you think about this general model that companies, especially in Armenia, I've noticed take that they provide these training programs as a way of really ensuring that the talent pool in Armenia is growing so that they themselves have access to more talent. Do you think this is something that is an effective way of tackling the issue of having enough talent for this sector, or is it kind of a crutch? Do more things need to be happening at the university level?
My personal philosophy is that this is a short-term fix. Every company is focusing on their specific needs, and let's fix it for the next year or two down the line. But looking into long-term vision and how to fix this issue, we definitely there is a vacuum. There is a problem that we're trying to fix. So we need to, I think, come to a more united way of doing this and a bigger scale of looking long term how we can fix this issue.
Yeah. Is DISQO, or maybe yourself through some of your other efforts in the past, have been involved in things at the university level or the education system level, or no?
We have personally not worked with universities per se. We have had one of our data science internships. We most of our applicants, we work with the AUA program. But other than that, we haven't had much contact with the universities, unfortunately.
I'm curious what your thinking is when you say that this is a short-term fix. Is the long-term fix to have university programs that are graduating enough engineers to meet Armenia's talent needs?
I think universities, of course, there's an importance there. I don't think it's the only factor. I think we need even the tech community to come together and understand what the needs are. And, we might need bigger centers to tackle these. And of course, the industry always needs to work in partnership with the education sector. And I also think this need, the needs comes from like a younger age. You have to instill this at a younger age, which is why, places like the TUMO Center are important in fixing this issue as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about sort of capturing people's interests at a younger age, because I had some experience teaching Python specifically in the regions in Kapan last year, and I was expecting that most of the participants would be, I guess I would say, probably younger than they were, but for various reasons, including the fact that this was sort of a you connect from home from your computer and join in the classes type of thing. My class was mostly people like young adults, I would say. And one of the questions that people would ask is, yeah, let's say we learn Python, but then what do we do with it in Kapan, for example? And it's an interesting question that I hadn't considered myself. This is just my own biases, I guess, but it's true. There aren't that many job openings for someone with a programming background in a city like Kapan. And I started thinking at the time how important TUMO's role is, because when you're a kid, you're not thinking about what your job prospect is going to be like a year after you take a class at TUMO, which is why I think what TUMO is doing now with the expansion into the regions, including opening up a center in Gapan soon, I think is super important. So you spent a long time at TUMO. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience was like there and what exactly you were doing?
Sure, and I can tie it back into the question you had right now. So yes, I was one of the managers at the TUMO Center since its opening in 2011. I was there for about 8+ years. There was a lot of obviously growth and learning that was done during that time, and the impact that TUMO has had on Armenia and globally, as we will see in the future, is immeasurable, in my opinion. And one of the things that TUMO does teach, and the philosophy it has, which does tackle the issue that you just brought up, is that TUMO tries to teach its students self-learning.
Right.
And I think that is key, because yes, you can go to a training class and learn Python, but unless you don't know how to self-learn and after that follow up and go take online classes and continue whatever it is you learned on your own, everything's going to be limited. And I disagree that a kid from Gapan can't find a job, because we all know in our post-COVID world, everything is done remotely. And as I mentioned in our training program, we had a trainee in Artsakh, from doing the training from the hospital. So, where there's a will, there's a way, and it all comes down to learning how to learn, So,
yeah, especially in this field, with how fast things change, constantly being able to keep up with the field and learning the new things that are required is super important. And speaking about remote work possibilities, after Kapan, I spent some time in Gorgis. And in Gorgis, a few months before I had arrived, was the Formula Gorgis conference that was organized by the crowdfunding Formula. And one thing that I kept hearing from people, from locals in Gorgas that have participated in the conference, was that the idea of remote work, the idea that you can go on a site like Upwork, and if you learn something like, let's say, digital marketing, you can provide your services on a platform like Upwork, or find a remote job. It was something that was being presented to them really for the first time, through like a conference and something in the city. And I think it's important that we really like spread this idea and show the possibilities there are in this sort of new world post COVID, but even before COVID, there were opportunities like that.
I just wanted to add that it is a fact that now local companies in Armenia,
Yeah.
for example, we're not just competing locally at this point.
Right.
We're competing in a global sense because a lot of people are taking on these remote jobs.
Yeah.
And you can also see this with the influx of recent visitors or immigrants to Armenia.
Yeah. And the talent pool has definitely become global. Let's go back to DISQO for a moment. So DISQO is one of a few companies now that have been founded by Armenians abroad and then have expanded into Armenia. I'm curious what the cultural impact of these companies are on the tech sector in Armenia. So when you guys were coming in 2018, Armenia's tech sector was already certainly there. But what we've seen over the last 2 years, I think, has really accelerated the growth of the sector. What do you think the biggest impact that these California-based companies moving to Armenia? What is the biggest impact that they have? A bit of a broad question. You can answer it.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So, for instance, I often hear that these companies give members of Armenia's tech sector a first-hand view at what building globally competitive products looks like, as opposed to maybe in the past it was more of a service-like industry.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, when we came in, actually during that same month, I remember 4 other companies from LA were registering in Armenia at the same time. So it was a transition period where we were going from outsourcing work to Armenia to actually building products in Armenia. And I think this was one of the major enticing points for DISQO, because one of our main products was built by engineers in Armenia, and so it's a global product. And this transitioned later to then what we see now, which is local companies are building now for the global market. And so we're out of that Armenia bubble now into a more global stage.
Right. Okay. And Tania, we can close on this question. Where would you like to see both DISQO and DISQO's presence in Armenia be in the 5-year timeframe?
Well, DISQO is growing in a very rapid pace. This week, we just announced we acquired a new company as well, Feedback Loop. We have offices now in New York as well. We're a global company. And I honestly just see us growing. We've had to do construction now for the 3rd year in a row because we're expanding so quickly. There's not enough space for all of us. So all I can see is growth, and we're going to be joining the global companies, and Armenia will be part of that story, which is a great story to tell.
Tania, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.